The Flint Hills as Wendell and Melissa introduce you to a modern-day rancher.
You're watching Kansas City's News at 5. Thanks for making KCTV #1 for news.
You know, fall is a special time out here in the Flint Hills. The prairie grasses are turning kind of a golden yellow, and they have sumac, blazing red sumac interspersed all through them. And then the cows are turning very fat because they've been munching on this grass all summer long, way since last spring.
You bet. And before the cold weather comes in and turns all this beauty dormant out here, those cattle have got to be rounded up. And what a privilege to have a front seat in the saddle on a cattle run in the Flint Hills. My guide was a bunch of modern-day cowboys. It's an autumn ritual in the Flint Hills to strap on the chaps, shimmy in the saddle, and help a neighbor make his annual cattle run.
It's not for the money, although things are pretty good right now, but it's for the good life. I mean, where else can you raise a family like this? How much closer to God can you get than right here? This is it. They get that response right away. Okay, cows, hit the gate.
This is a picture out of the old Western movies, but seeing real cowboys on horseback rounding up cattle on the range, you might expect to hear a lot of hooping and hollering.
You try to be as quiet and as gentle when you're handling cattle as you possibly can to keep them calm and relaxed. Yelling and screaming does nothing but work them up, makes them nervous.
Yeah, we don't like a lot of stepping and yowling unless there's one hell of a problem. Try not to get them excited, because if you get them excited, they go to running or whatever and they lose weight. And we get paid by the pound. So you want all the pounds on the scales you can get.
These days, Dick Poovey is helping sell beef to a whole new customer. His family was the focus of this promotional video that is playing in Japanese grocery stores.
Well, we were plumb tickled to death to be selected. You know, they interviewed like 5 families across the state of Kansas. We were tickled to death. They came back to us to do it and do it right here.
For the rancher, time's a-changin'. 2 days a week, Dick Poovey is also the Paxico banker.
And with the job offer from the bank, it diversifies me clear out of agriculture. So I'm a little more stable, you know. But I'd rather just run cows, sure. These hills, you can take a look at them and experience them. But as far as the kind of people you work with, that's something kind of special too. Because you just don't find this type of people everywhere, where they'll come and help you out when you're in a bind. And of course, you know, I'm tickled to death to go help them back. And very seldom does money ever change hands, just trade labor.
Poovey says the prairie gives you knowledge you won't find in any textbook.
You know, I graduated magna cum laude from K-State in agriculture. I learned all about the hormones in a body, but they didn't teach me how to round up no cattle. That's something you got to learn.
It's so trying to be kind here. Oh, I tell you, that was great fun, and those are very, very special people to put up with. Photographer Brad Richmond and Melissa Smith out here trying to ride horseback with those guys.
But you did it. You're not a city dude like I am.
And I'm feeling it today, as a matter of fact.
I was going to say, if I did, I'd be standing up right now. Looks like a great weekend for the great outdoors. Mike has that story in just a minute.
It's a great idea. I do too. Well, just ahead, we'll head back to the Flint Hills of Kansas, where Wendell shows us a church built with Bibles and guns.
Long ago, the prairie was a hostile environment, but settlers were coming here in the mid-1800s.
That's right. In 1856, a group of Protestants came here all the way from New Haven, Connecticut, to ensure that Kansas would be a free state. And the mark they left on the small town of Wabaunsee remains to this day. how proud the founders of this town and this church would be, the so-called Prairie Guard that came here to fight against slavery, to know that even today June Crenshaw practices for Sunday's service on the pump organ that dates back to last century.
But as old as that organ is, it isn't as old as this Bible. This Bible came out here with the founders of this church back in 1856. And not only this Bible, but also this rifle.
June's husband, George, can tell you all about that rifle. In addition to farming, he's obsessed with the church's 128-year history. And he tells how Connecticut preacher Henry Ward Beecher offered to match the rifles the departing settlers could muster from their own congregations.
So they got their 25 pledged there in the church. And in less than a week, they said, the 25 Sharps rifles arrived from Henry Ward Beecher's church, and they sent 25 Bibles with them. And from that time forth, it was just known as the Beecher Bible and Rifle Colony.
And the Beecher Bible and Rifle Church. And as discordant as that sounded, it was the only part of the plan that really worked.
Well, there was any number of Civil War veterans. I mean, they're buried over here in the Wabaunsee Cemetery.
But there's no record that the Prairie Guard ever fired a shot. And the grand plan for the sprawling prairie town of Wabaunsee turned to dust when the railroad passed it by. But strangely, as the little town withered, the little church just hung on. And with part-time preacher Lynn Roth and a thinning congregation, it still holds on today.
Well, as you can see here, we run between 20 and 30 usually, Sunday morning service. And that's about, I suppose, 30 if everyone's here.
And as long as the farmers here hold on, the Beecher Bible and Rifle Church plans to hold on too.
Yes, if you don't have, this is a museum. And I don't want it to be a museum, and I don't think most of the church do. That's the purpose of a church, is to reach out to others.
Another interesting thing about that church is that it integrated back in the early 50s, long before the Civil Rights Movement, without any commotion whatever. Just seemed the natural thing to do.
Seems like they were ahead of themselves.
In some ways they were.
When we come back, we'll take you to a little town in the Flint Hills that's using the past to carve out its future. When you tell someone from a different part of the country that you're from Kansas or Kansas City, I'll bet you've heard reference made to the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, and you know, the further you drive into Kansas, the more you wonder if that yellow brick road has been covered up by interstate concrete. But when you pull off at the Paxico exit, you'll find it isn't your usual road stop. Dorothy Gale is there to greet you, along with a store full of items made in Kansas. It's a sort of roadside gallery, and once you get past the obvious Kansas seeds for the birds, there are birds made out of Kansas seed. There are jellies and jams from Alma, cornbread from Calvesta, and country critters from Burlington. You won't find anything here that's not made in Kansas. Even the eats and drinks are homegrown. The state's first licensed winery is here, and the award-winning bottle is the Flint Hills Red.
While there is a lot of flavor there, Dorothy's stop is still about a half-mile from the real land of Oz. Pulling into Paxico, Kansas is almost like pulling into the past. At the turn of the century, the railroad brought this little town to life, and nearly 100 years later, the general store is again the hoppin' spot. Well, as hoppin' as it can get for a town of 185 people.
It was a sleepy little farm town. It was kind of a close-knit community, and you went to town on Saturday night and got a cold bottle of knee-high orange from the grocery store.
Those school-age memories were nearly erased when Steve Hund returned to his hometown 20 years ago.
You know, when I decided to move back here and start our business, why, there was nothing but mostly abandoned buildings and a dying town, a dying farm community.
Today, it's the past that's giving Paxico its future.
I'll try it on.
Put it on.
It looks like Butch Cassidy's hat.
Yeah.
And now I feel like I'm part of what may have taken place here in the 1880s when the town was starting to grow, enthusiasm, and people were excited about what was happening then, and they're excited now. So I feel like, in a sense, it's like living in a little boom town in the 1800s.
Booming antique business is one thing, but big city life, it isn't.
The biggest crime we had was a prank. The wooden Indian from down the street was placed on top of the phone booth one morning when we came to work, and that's about as exciting as it gets around here.
Paxico got its name from an old Indian medicine man, but its natives weren't American.
This is a German community. We're proud of that. Even when I opened my store here less than 20 years ago, there were men that sat on this bench here and conversed in German.
Their heritage is honored each year at the Paxico Polka Fest. While most of those men have died by now, the ease of their daily living is still felt in Paxico. And when you come here, you don't have to buy a piece of the past. You can simply window shop, and it won't cost you a dime.
I'm happy to be here, but I think you have to go away and live in other major metropolitan centers before you do realize the beauty of the Flint Hills and the quality of life that is offered here.
Kathy was saying that she thinks some of the natives of the community probably don't realize how precious the place is because they haven't been away.
And it is unique, different from other farm towns in that it keeps that old farm town character with the old storefronts and even the awnings over the sidewalk on Main Street and groups of folks sitting around on the steps. I think one of them was even drinking a knee-high pop.
I bet he was.
Great town.
Oh, it is.
Beautiful. And we'll be back in just a moment.
Anne's back in Kansas City now with a look at what's coming up at 6. Anne?
Thank you, Melissa. We're less than a week and a half from Election Day, and the vital and inevitable issue of taxes is preoccupying the candidates for this year's hottest race, the Kansas gubernatorial election. Tonight, KCTV's Reed Black compares the tax proposals of Joan Finney and Mike Hayden. Now back to Wendell and Melissa.
Well, you know, some people say there's nothing to see in Kansas. It's just big flat territory out there. But this, the Flint Hills, is really the last of the prairie that used to cover about a third of the United States. So it's really something, if you get out here, to stop and see.
And it may be hard to believe, but the I-70 is only about 2 miles south of us.
It doesn't take long to get out into the
doesn't.
wilderness.
It doesn't.
So that concludes our look at the Flint Hills live from Paxico, Kansas. We hope you've enjoyed us. We'll see you back in Kansas City on Monday.
This horse has been known to blow snot all over cameras.
Yeah, I tell you what, I've wallowed in pig shit and everything.
Oh, okay. Howdy, Fred. It's the boys of the Rafter Payout in Wabunsee County. We just want to take this opportunity to say howdy and tell you we think that it's been long enough now that you should know the real truth. The truth of the matter is your second child was actually fathered by Cecil Horsley. Have a good day, Fred.
Bye, Fred.
Howdy. Why don't you gather up the family and we'll have a big roundup here on Kansas City News at 5. Come join us.
Great.
Nothing like they told me to say, was it?
You got it all in.
You're gonna make it in the movie.
Well, yeah.